Entertaining, informative, and educational. Inspiring content that makes a difference.
This is the Maximus Troy Publications Broadcasting Network.
Join the Academy. The Breeders' Academy proudly presents Bred to Perfection with Kenny Troiano, a show for serious breeders.
Whether you are looking to create a new strain or simply improve an old one, you have come to the right place.
Daddy, I want more chickens.
Oh, boy.
Now, here's your host, Kenny Troiano.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Bred to Perfection. My name is Kenny Troiano, and this, my friends, is the podcast devoted to helping you become a better breeder and taking your strain to the next level. That's right, my friends. It doesn't matter if you are brand new to breeding or you've been breeding for many years. There is something all of us can do to improve our fowl for future generations.
Don't you worry. They say there's nothing to heredity anyway.
Where did this stuff come from? What's the origins of it? And I'd like to take a little dirt road off for a minute and talk about origins, because honestly, to introduce you to my view of what a chicken is and how all of this needs to be approached, we probably need to look at what I think a chicken is and where it came from.
You're talking my language because, as you know, I love evolution. I love all that stuff.
I know you do, and that's what I was so thrilled. I wouldn't even bring this stuff up if I hadn't seen that. But since I saw that, I believe this is an area where a lot of research I've done has a potential to be shared and at least be of interest to one person. That's enough.
Yeah, this is so cool. I knew I was swimming upstream when I was introducing the idea of relating evolution to selective breeding, because people weren't going to see the connection. And I was like, there's a huge connection here. If we can understand the different mechanisms of evolution, we can better understand breeding and the breeding methods that we use. And when that clicked, you couldn't stop me. I didn't even care what people thought. I was going to teach it one way or another.
Me too, and I'm so glad to see that. Absolutely. It is evolution in motion. Darwin devised his theory from looking at domestic animals.
Yes.
It's not only that they're similar, it's that it's inseparable.
Yes.
The malleability of the domestic animals is a 100% reflection of the malleability of life. They are inseparable, and it is absolutely irrefutable proof that evolution is real. That's why no one wants to hear it.
And there's some people like that. I believe in God, but I still see the connection. It was one of those things where it's like, why didn't I think of that? Because when I started studying Darwin and understanding how it all works, it seemed like common sense. It was like, oh my God, of course it works like this.
So obvious. So obvious. Well, and here's the thing. What part of evolution in and of itself excludes there being some deity or creative principle to the universe?
Right.
Where's the conflict? All I see is people creating conflict for the desire for conflict.
Yeah. But to think that things are created, never change. I mean, we see it all the time. Things are changing all the time. If it wasn't that way, we wouldn't have the chickens we have today. All the different breeds and varieties. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. This show was brought to you by the Breeders' Academy, where we will help you to increase your knowledge of breeding, advance your skills as a breeder, and help you to improve the quality and performance of your fowl. As a member, we'll provide you with the roadmap that you will need to create a true family or strain. I urge you to check it out. You've got nothing to lose, and you can cancel at any time. You also have a 30-day money-back guarantee. Simply go to www.breedersacademy.com to sign up.
The Breeders' Academy will not only change the way you think about breeding, but improve the way you breed your fowl.
I hope to see you there. So let's get started.
Okay, so to start with, you know what domestication is.
I understand domestication.
Okay, well, but do you understand what is the one thing that made domestication possible? There's one mutation that made it possible. There's one fundamental mutation. Without this mutation, you cannot have a domestic.
Okay.
It is a gene that turns off part of the functioning of the adrenals. All domestic animals have it, and humans happen to have the exact same gene mutation because we domesticated ourselves, of course. As we were domesticating the animals, we were also domesticating ourselves. The same forces that we use to domesticate animals, we were applying to ourselves at the same time. It was our setting of self-domestication that created the setting that would allow the domestication of animals.
So how do we explain that to the layman?
I don't know.
I don't know if they need to know
I don't
that.
know. I mean,
but...
they don't. This is for you and I.
Oh, okay.
This is geek out time, which I've been dying to get to. This is just for us to enjoy the fact that we both can see this. So there is that gene mutation. It turns off part of the function of the adrenal gland. Now, once you get a domestic line going, you can get further mutations and you can get modifiers, epigenetic factors at work that modify that further. For instance, some of the chickens, like a Sumatra or some of the Mediterranean breeds, I would consider them only marginally domestic. In other words, they probably only have that one mutation because otherwise they're crazy and they're flighty and they're nervous. I don't consider them a full domestic.
Oh, I see what you're
Those game lines I would consider more domestic than a Mediterranean, but not fully domestic, because full domestication would also turn the adrenals off to the point that you no longer have male-on-male aggression. There are only a few chicken breeds that are fully domestic by my definition of that. It's just my definition. There are only a few lines, and they are all Asiatics, and they all are in one way or another related to the Cochin. I'm talking about Cochins and Brahmas and Langshans, and then things related to them like Silkies and Japanese Bantams. Now, they do have a psylloid stock in them, malayoid psylloid. That's part of the equation of what made them. But the reason that they are fully domestic is because Emperor Qin Huangdi, the first emperor of China, set up a national poultry breeding enterprise in China to where there were ministers of poultry breeding in every province, and they had these big dedicated farms that were producing birds in mass production to feed the vast armies of China. And there were then poultry breeding ministers throughout Chinese history all the way up into the Ming. So this was a concerted state effort. And one of the things that they were doing was to produce the largest birds possible. Another thing they were doing was to have as much meat as possible. Another thing was egg production and these big brown eggs. Another thing, in order to do that, was the birds had to be as calm as possible so that they did not burn their weight off. And then another thing they had to be able to do was not have male-on-male aggression so that large numbers of males could be maintained together without constant fighting. So over the course of 2,000, 3,000 years, the ancient Chinese fully domesticated those lines that descend from them. I don't know how much you know about the early, like the Victorian and Edwardian poultry breeders of the fancy breeds. What do you know about the
No, I don't know that
breed?
much about that at all.
Okay. We as Westerners look at it and we say the Cochins were imported in the 1840s. Okay, well, that's nice, but that's not true. What was imported in the 1840s were 5 or 6 different Chinese breeds and crosses of those breeds that we then tinkered with and crossed and segregated into little groups and turned into Cochins and Brahmas, and then later imported Lanshan, which is what the black Cochin had already descended from, and then bred them as a separate thing and called them Lanshan. Those are the 3 Asiatics. Now, Asiatics in the sense of Asiatic gamefowl are ancestral to these birds, but they're not the only ancestors of them. So the domestication genes in the aseals and the malayoids, they are more domestic than a bankibid type of gamefowl, the jungle fowl-looking gamefowl. Those big Asian gamefowls are more domestic. They're calmer. They're more confident and more laid back.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they'll still pit. And so what the Chinese did was they crossed a type of bird that they had in China that basically would have looked like a black-breasted red dorking, which is basically almost completely southern Chinese red jungle fowl descended. And then they crossed these birds coming out of the Indonesian islands with these birds coming out of India. And that's the gene pool that what we refer to as the chittagongs or the Cochin Chinas emerged out of, that we then bred the Cochins and Brahmas and Langshans out of here. And then all of the American breeds are basically clean-legged versions of the Cochin and the Brahma. You'll read the old articles and they say, oh, well, so-and-so created the Rhode Island Red or created the New Hampshire. No, they just bred the leg feathers off the Cochins. And the reason they often did that, I had an old breeder when I was a kid tell me that getting those birds clean-legged was an accident because the birds with the leg feathers would get stuck in the mud and the hogs would eat them. And so they ended up with just clean-legged ones.
Oh, through variation and selection?
Yeah, when those birds came from China, they didn't look at all like a Cochin does now.
No, what I mean is every now and then they'd get a clean-legged bird, and those are the ones they'd breed, right?
But most of them that came from China were clean-legged to begin with.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They didn't come in looking like show Cochins. They came in looking like New Hampshires with a few feathers on their toes. Most of those birds are not leg-feathered in China to this day. And even when they are, they won't have much. I can send you pictures that I have from China of the birds that those were all bred from. And they basically are New Hampshires and partridge rocks and black and white rocks. And maybe they've got a little leg feathering. Maybe they have the amount of leg feathering of like a catalog type Brahma or something like that. But that's about as much as you see. All that fluff and all of that was bred up in England in the 1880s and 1890s.
Wow, you dug way deeper into the domestic side than I ever did. Like I said, I'm mostly into the gamefowl type.
That's right, because this was an obsession for me. And when I came to realize that the only truly, fully domestic fowl all descended from those Chinese imports, that left only one question: why? And so that led me down this rabbit hole. Now, let's backtrack just a little bit. One other thing before we get any further down this little rabbit hole that I want to go back to is the origin of domestication. When I was getting into this as a kid, the story was, well, they're all descended from red jungle fowl, and they were domesticated in 2000 BC, the earliest. Now they've got it pushed back to where the official story is 5000 BC, and there's a little bit of admixture from maybe the gray and the green. But the reality when we look at the genes is that there is a long period of proto-domestication that is several tens of thousands of years long. And what that means is that humans have been in Asia, first as Neanderthal and Denisovan, and then later as Homo sapiens, for 300,000 years or longer. And so what apparently was going on is that red jungle fowl that had the mutation that changed the adrenal function in the wild basically would come around human encampments and scavenge. And as humans threw out refuse, and there was some kind of relationship between wild early humans and wild early genetically modified on their own jungle fowl, that's the beginnings of domestication. That's the beginning of domestication for the wolf, too, is that wolves that didn't have the extreme fear of humans would just come around them as scavengers. And probably as often as not, the humans were eating the wolves and the jungle fowl that did that. So there's a long period there where you've got this interaction going on, but it doesn't result in full domestication because they're probably just like, those jungle fowls are in the shit pile again, you know.
Right.
Go out there and spear one. But the other thing that I believe is a strong component, you probably know that a lot of the early domestication of chickens from the historical record had to do with cockfighting.
Exactly.
There's a lot of evidence that cockfighting was more important than a food animal to early humans. And then you probably also know that a lot of that had ritual and religious and spiritual significance.
Right.
That it wasn't just place your bets. It was these people were animistic and they were shamanistic, So they had a belief in spirit and spirits infusing all things. And so for a jungle fowl to come walking out of the jungle and come walking into your camp, well, that's a communication from the ancestors. That's the spirits. That's something out of the norm. So it's going to be taken note of by the people that are watching such things in the community. So that's another thing we have to factor, is that they would have attached a spiritual significance to that. So the early domestication has to do, I think, more with chance gene mutations in the wild, and then what those interactions were with early humans, and then what they came to mean to early humans. And so that extends domestication, proto-domestication, back tens, even perhaps hundreds of thousands of years. And the reason that I can say that with a lot of confidence is that when I talk to some of these geneticists that I work with that are typing genes, they're like, some of this stuff is ancient. Some of this stuff is super ancient. Because there's a mutational time clock that you can use that can give you some idea of how long ago a mutation occurred. And something I've been told repeatedly is a lot of these mutations look super ancient, like 50,000 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So this is not a thing that just started happening in 5000 BC or 2000 BC. This was something that kicked into high gear at that time, or changed in some way, or became such a production level that it then jumps into the archaeological record in mass numbers to the point that it's noticeable. But it had begun way earlier. And then the other thing is that there are, two things. One, there probably are no such thing as pure red jungle fowl anymore. Just because there are parts of Asia where no humans live today doesn't mean there weren't a group of humans with early proto-domestic quasi-chicken, quasi-jungle fowl that got back into the wild, and those gene changes went back into the population. So there's probably no pure wild red jungle fowl.
I'm hearing that's happening right now, too.
Oh, yeah, more so than ever right now. But anything that's happening now has happened in some way in the past. You can just bet on it. Humans have been in Asia. They've had chickens, just like in Vietnam. It's a little dirt road here. But in Vietnam, during the Vietnam War, a lot of the chicken breeds were wiped out. But recently, a research team went to Vietnam, and they were doing a research project looking for unusual genes and looking for the origins of chickens, because what we call Vietnam now is ancient southern China. And that's where we know the red jungle fowl genetics that are at the base of all the chicken breeds, the mtDNA, derives from the Chinese version of the red jungle fowl. So we know that's the home of the mother lineage. And what they found when they went out into the countryside, that every little village they went into had completely different chicken breeds. And this is the thing that Vietnamese villagers have always done. And they said that where their birds had been wiped out in the Vietnam War, they had bred them back and they had them again. And they said this was an ancient tradition, something they had done for millennia. And it wasn't like this village had them with rose combs and that village had the same thing, but it was single comb, and this village had the same thing and it was hen feathered. They were like wildly different from village to village. Like this village had them and they were fibromelanotic and they had giant rose combs and they were hen feathered and they had creeper legs. And this village over here, they had them, they looked like modern games, except they were rose combed and they had fantails. And this village over here had them, they were silk feathered frizzles and they were crested. Crazy, wildly divergent phenotypes, and they had resegregated all of this on their own just from whatever was left over. And they showed that a lot of these genes were unique. They were often related to alleles, but they weren't the same gene. So it wasn't just that they had gotten Western chicken breeds and reestablished them. It was that they had literally salvaged these back into existence out of what they could find that was left after the war.
After we cover all the genetics, this alone would make a great show. The information.
Absolutely. I thought it would too. I'm talking about it more now just because we can geek out on it. But yeah, I'm willing to do some stuff with this.
I'm just sitting here listening to you and I'm thinking, wow, this is all really cool information.
A lot of information that I think is really profoundly useful to breeders, and I think is profoundly useful for the kind of work you do through the breeding group you have.
Yeah.
Know that this stuff is happening.
That shows where some of this variation comes from. Look at jungle fowl, and they brought them from the jungles into captivity, and took them to different geological areas.
Geographic.
Do we think, do we think that epigenetics is what kicked in to give us some of the variation that we ended up getting?
Ironically, no. It all goes back to the hybridization. And that was what I was just about to verge into. In the wild, there are areas where the red and the gray jungle fowl overlap in India, and there are areas in Indonesia where the red and the green naturally overlap. Now, they inhabit different biomes in the wild, so they have natural barriers to hybridization in the wild. But humans break down biomes, and it is in transitional biomes where hybrids naturally occur. So if humans have gone in and done slash and burn agriculture like they've done for millennia in an area where a green and red and or green and gray jungle fowl, depending on whether they're in Indonesia or India, and created a disrupted biome, those are areas where natural hybrids could have occurred. That would have planted the seed. It only took one human saying, that's in between the two. That's not one or the other. And that would have been seen as sacred. They would have lost their mind.
Darwin even talked about this.
Darwin did. Now, Darwin thought they all came from the red jungle fowl.
Yeah, but he talked about hybridization.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. But here's the thing. It is clear that the gene mutation that created the window that allowed domestication is something that happened in the red jungle fowl. The red jungle fowl have always been the most numerous, and they have the widest distribution. That means they probably also have the widest genetic diversity of any of the species. Well, we know now that they do, and they probably did then.
That would be weird to me because how recessive they are.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. The thing of it is, you can have tremendous genetic diversity and still have a closed phenotype. If that phenotype is the only phenotype that really works for them because of their environment, you're going to find a consistent phenotype everywhere. And they can still have tremendous genetic diversity because there's a lot of other genes than just phenotype genes.
Okay.
So it's always important to remember that genetic diversity can happen within a group of animals that all look identical and don't have genetic diversity for something like phenotype. Those are two separate concepts, you know. But more variation in the existing forms of red jungle fowl in the wild than you do in grays or in greens or in so on. And where you see the variation is in how deep or how saturated or how diluted the pheomelanins are on the male specifically, but also to some extent on the female. So that is where you have phenotypic variation in red jungle fowl populations today, likely the same in the past, and you don't see that in the others. So the actual domestication occurs because you got a domestic population of red jungle fowl that were calm, or at least calm enough that they could be maintained. Once that was the case, then they could capture these wild-caught males of the gray jungle fowl and the green jungle fowl and cross them to these domestic red jungle fowl hens and create hybrids. Now, most of those hybrids were not fertile, but occasionally you would get a fertile male. And they're especially sometimes fertile if you take them back to the domestic red jungle fowl or chicken side. So what has happened is that over time, those genes from F1 hybrid males that were fertile have been taken back into red jungle fowl domestics. And that allowed a lot, and the Salon too, it's been done with them as well. That brought a lot of genetic diversity into the domestic population. And by now, there are no living chicken populations that are strictly domestic red jungle fowl. They all have some admixture from the other jungle fowl as well, even if it's just tiny percentages.
I figured that a lot of the variation and a lot of genetic diversity that we were getting that created all the different breeds was the hybridization of the different jungle fowl. So although I didn't find a whole lot of literature on that, I just assumed it would be. There's
not a lot of literature. I did a lot of work on it. The people I did the work with have never published it because they're human researchers. And the way they applied that research is they have applied it to the work with human hybridization between sapiens, Neanderthal, Denisovan, and the other as yet unnamed variant hominids that are in our ancestry. So again, they were using chickens as a model organism. So their goal was not to publish information on chickens, but to use it as an example to formulate their models for modeling human hybridization.
That's too bad they didn't publish their work on chickens. I think a lot of people would have found it useful. Mm-hmm.
But there's a little out there, like that paper I sent you yesterday about the Becazar that touches on it, establishes in the literature that's a thing. But like the acyls and the Malayoids, the Asian games, that's coming from the hybridization of gray and red predominantly. That's India. The Indonesian games that are more bone extended. They're the big, tall, freaky-looking ones, they're like Malays and things like that. Because, the acyl are more stocky. Yeah. They're shorter. They don't have as much bone extension. But then you get into like the weird Indonesian type birds that has the Indian extraction from regular acyl type lines blended into green junglefowl Becazar type lines, because the green junglefowl in the wild have longer bone ratios than any of the other junglefowl to begin with. So what I call skeletal extension is a derivative out of green junglefowl. The green junglefowl have longer tail feathers, and they also only molt once every 18 months, whereas all the other junglefowl molt once every 12 months. Because they live in a much more tropical climate, they live in a different setting, and they also are more of a flying bird than the other junglefowl, so they don't need to be in molt all the time. Flying birds don't molt often as ground-dwelling birds.
I figured they molt it, but they did it gradually than like a chicken does. So you're thinking that they don't molt as often?
No, they just don't molt as often. They only lose their tail feathers once every 18 months.
Oh, wow.
And so the non-molting genes and the long-tailed genes, those come from green junglefowl. Genes like frizzling and silk feather and fibromelanosis, black skin, those all come. The E alleles, I believe, all derive from the different junglefowl ancestry. So like Wheaton comes from Ceylon. When you look at the Ceylon hen, she is basically a Wheaton with a little bit of stippling thrown on her. The brown alleles come from the green junglefowl. When you look at that hen, she looks almost like a brown. The Birchen and Crowwing, the extended black, the whole Birchen family come from both the green and the gray. Because when you look at the green and the gray male, they're both crowwings. They're not duckwings. Here's the thing. They didn't come as a piece. They're not the same. If you type Wheaton now against a Ceylon, you're not going to see exactly the same gene. And the reason for that is that in hybrids, you get a bunch of weird stuff that doesn't happen anywhere else in genetics. You get these recombinations where genes break up through meiosis in later generations and recombine into new configurations that make completely different phenotypes and novel backgrounds. So like fibromelanosis, you can see in the green junglefowl because the male has a big blue earlobe. Part of his face is blue. And a fibromelanotic bird with a white earlobe has a blue earlobe. But it doesn't make black skin in them because it's not in the right background to manifest as black skin. But when you get it in the green junglefowl background, which has slate legs, and so it doesn't have the inhibitor of dermal melanin, the green junglefowl have red legs, so they don't have Pheomelanin legs, they have inhibitor. Then when you get it in the right background, bingo, it's black skin. So it's expressing in a novel background in a way that it doesn't express in the progenitor species. Then you also get these things that occur where you get genes that break up and only have partial function.
Yeah,
chromosomal mismatches and chromosomal misalignments. Well, me and one of my friends have this great line for it that we stole from Einstein. We like to call it spooky genetics at a distance because it's removed from the progenitor species. It's removed from the first generation hybrid. It only really starts showing up in later generations. And people who don't know what they're seeing are like, look at all these mutations that are occurring.
Okay, thanks for listening.
Yes, thank you again for joining us on the Bred to Perfection podcast show. This show was brought to you by the Breeders Academy, where by becoming a member, you can increase your knowledge of breeding, advance your skills as a breeder, and take you and your fowl to the next level.
We can also show you how to create a strain from hybrid crosses or mongrel flocks and help you to create, maintain, and improve your present strains. We urge you to check it out. You have nothing to lose and you can cancel anytime.
To join us at the Breeders Academy membership website, go to www.breedersacademy.com.
Best of all, I'll be there to help you every step of the way.
While you're checking out the Breeders Academy, make sure to sign up for our newsletter, The Breeders Bulletin. We provide a lot of free bonus materials and some great information that will take you and your fowl to the next level. Well, that's it for now.
We hope you join us next time for another episode of Bred to Perfection. We'll see you later.
Bye.